Hello, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to Half Hour on the Hill. My guest today is Secretary Davey, Secretary of Transportation. So, Secretary Davey, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Senator. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that we've worked very closely together since you've been Secretary on transportation issues, and just want to get a sense right now, what are you spending most of your time right now on? What are the big things going on in Massachusetts on transportation?
Sure. Well, transportation has been a big topic of conversation. As you know, Governor Patrick asked the Department of Transportation and the legislature, frankly, to come up with a transportation finance plan to really solve the transportation challenges. And so over the last 12 months, my team and I have been out listening to customers, holding hearings across the state, and we crafted and published a plan in January, which talks about how we're going to tackle the transportation challenges of the Commonwealth, but not only tackle the challenges, but also invest in our future as well. And we've been, as you know, we filed a bill with the legislature to on our suggestion on how to handle that, and the legislature is debating that as well. And I hope that over the next few weeks we can come to agreement and ultimately make those investments I think we need.
Absolutely, and as you know, I was a strong supporter of the governor's plan, continue to fight for that number to make the significant investments in transportation. When we talk about the sort of revenue that's being discussed and dedicated, I mean, what are the areas that we need to do a better job in Massachusetts in improving and, as you say, lead to truly a 21st century transportation system?
Yeah, no, I appreciate this. There are really three things that we proposed. One is to ostensibly right the financial ship of the T and the DOT. Two is to invest in our current roads and bridges and transit system today. And then third is to make some strategic investments for expansion for our long term. So very quickly, the MBTA continues to have year-to-year financial challenges, largely due to its debt service. The DOT has been having this terrible practice of borrowing to pay for operations over the last 2 decades. We would rid that. And then the regional transit authorities. I mean, particularly in your district, you've got a number of regional transit authorities that we pay in arrears. We actually pay them a year later, and so they have to borrow. So with all these financial machinations, we fix. That's one. Two, we make significant investments in our current system. Crosby's Corner is a program we're doing today, but there are 10 Crosby's Corners out there that we can't do across the state, and so we'll be able to do that. And then finally, making some strategic investments in the future. Places of the Commonwealth that have been left behind. Fall River, New Bedford, for example, additional investment in Springfield, the Green Line extension. So that's the governor's plan, is to really right the financial ship, invest in our system today, and then target investment for the future.
And that sounds like a very strong plan, and I recognize the need to invest in each of those areas. The district that I represent, Metro West, there's always the issue of the Mass Pike and how that relates to some of the big dig costs and the MBTA debt. And yet my understanding is it's really not, sort of a simplistic comment that the big dig debt is why the MBTA debt is so significant, but it's really not the case, and yet often there's not a full explanation of why we have such significant debt. I'm wondering if you might be able to
elaborate on that. Sure.
Yeah.
So in the MBTA's case, so the MBTA didn't pay to build the big dig, right? The roads and the tunnels, but in order to get a permit to build the big dig, the state had to make certain commitments around improving transit, and as a result, the MBTA was required to take on those commitments 12 years ago. So about a third of all the MBTA's debt is related to these transit commitments that were related to the big dig. In addition, the T has been unable to make the kinds of investments that it should over time, commuter rail coaches and infrastructure. And so that has been another reason why they've been falling behind. On the question of the turnpike, in fact, I know I've heard it said before that folks are paying for the big dig. In fact, almost all of tolls collected on the Western Turnpike are going to the Western Turnpike or
for maintenance
ancillary. That's right, exactly, or ancillary improvements, and not going to big dig debt. But still, there's a toll equity issue. There are folks, Metro West and other parts of the state that pay, and many others that don't. And I think one thing that the governor expressed openness to in the future is looking at how we might work with our federal partners who regulate this to see if we can toll other roads in the future.
And that is dealing with the interstate highways. That is sort of the federal
correct.
FTA has oversight over that?
So Federal Highway does, so that's right. So we could not choose to toll 93 or 95 or 495 for that matter. We would need federal approval. We could toll Route 2, not that I'm saying we would, but Route 2, Route 1, Route 24, the state roads, we have the ability to do that. You wouldn't do that anyways because all you're doing is pushing traffic elsewhere as opposed to actually probably collecting a user fee that then you can use to invest back in the system. So, but I think it's a wave of the future. People talk about user fees more generally speaking, and tolling is one of those ways you can do that, generate revenue to pay for transportation.
And in terms of 93 and 95, I mean, is that is it more sort of a political challenge to have that move forward, or?
No, it's on the statutes, on the books, if you will, at the federal level. So I think part of it is a little political, but at the same time, the federal government is really, notwithstanding the good work our delegation is doing, is really taking a step back from contributing to transportation. So the interstate highway system was built in the 1950s with federal money. The Turnpike, not so much, which is why we can toll the Turnpike, and we can toll the Tobin, and we can toll the Callahan and Sumner tunnels because we built those. But when you used federal money, then we're restricted in what we can and can't do. But my sense is in the future, if the federal government is going to take a step away from providing states with resources, and they should give the states the tools then to raise some revenues. And one way to do that is tolling.
Okay, so that is possible if the FHA had approved that.
That's correct. Yeah. That's right.
Okay. I've talked to you about it a few times is sort of alternative transportation is rail trails, and I'm just wondering, in the plan that you put forward, I mean, what was the vision for rail trails? Because as you know, there's 3 rail trails that cut through the Middlesex and Worcester district. It's something that's very popular, great constituency that really is advocating for that, and yet they often see delays going out.
And delays in large part due to not having enough money to invest. And that's the challenge, because this administration, the governor, lieutenant governor have been strong advocates of multimodal transportation, and that includes walking and bicycling. I've read some statistics recently. You're far healthier if you're walking and bicycling on a daily basis. Particularly kids, you see obesity rates come down and child diabetes. I mean, it's not just about transportation, as you know, but it's also about healthy choices as well. So the Assabet River Trail, the Bruce Freeman River Trail, for example, or I should say, I guess those are phases of the Bruce Freeman Trail already, because it does exist. Yeah. That those would be funded under our plan. In fact, our plan dedicated $13 billion over 10 years in new transportation spending, and over $500 million of that was dedicated to rail trails, to recreational trails all across the state, and that included the Freeman and the Assabet trails. You took me out to show me where the Assabet Trail in particular would be. It's a really exciting project, one we support, and if we can get a bill done together, one we'll fund.
That would be great. And last week, the Boston MPO voted to provide that forward funding on the tip for the next few years for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and the Assabet River Rail Trail, which was fantastic. But I recognize we need more resources. One of I would say beyond Mass Pike Route 2, I'd say probably the biggest transportation infrastructure requests that I hear from are, of course, the commuter rail. Is the Worcester commuter rail going into Boston, the Fitchburg commuter rail. What have the improvements been over the past few years for those who haven't followed as closely? Sure.
Well, in Fitchburg, a lot has gone on. And as you know, you worked hard on it. Some of your other colleagues as well in the House, the Senate, and Congressman Olver, to get federal money to double track the Fitchburg line. I mean, that sounds a bit of a nerdy transportation term, but what does it mean? It means, you've got two-way traffic going on only one track, and so the trains have to wait for each other to get out of the way. With two-track operations, we can run more frequent service, more reliable service. That's underway. As you know, we've made investments in stations, South Acton Station, Littleton Station. We hope to go to Westminster.
Yes.
We are going to go to Westminster by 2014. And then some of the less glamorous stuff that we've been investing in, signals and ties and bridges, all really important. And then for the customer, what are they going to see? We've made a significant investment in locomotives and coaches. For customers either on the Worcester or Fitchburg lines, The number one reason for a delay on the commuter rail service is a locomotive failure. We are running locomotives that are older than you and I out there, and we're not so young anymore.
No, we're not.
So we have to get new equipment, and then new coaches too. So a lot of our older coaches are used on the north side of Boston, which includes the Fitchburg line, and these new double-decker coaches we're getting from the Korean company Hyundai Rotem, folks in the Fitchburg line will see. On Worcester, same thing. As you know, we purchased the Worcester line from CSX, the freight company. We didn't own it, and so that was a concern for a lot of the delays we saw. And we just last month added 2 new direct or super express trains from Worcester, stopping at Framingham and then going to Back Bay. So your ride into Boston, if you're getting on in Framingham or Worcester, is that much quicker. And we're adding more service this fall to get to 20 round trips between Worcester and Boston. So a lot of work going on both lines. I mean, these are fast-growing. As Metro West is, if not the fastest, it usually is the fastest-growing region of the state. So making those kind of transportation investments are really critical.
And you're right. Metro West is booming. Companies still come here. Commuters or residents are coming here for the schools or for the jobs. What is the vision for commuter rail west of Worcester, including for commercial freight? Because I know that's an area that's less focused upon, and yet my understanding it's increasing.
Absolutely. And so as part of the deal that allowed the state to buy the line, the Worcester line from CSX moved a major freight facility from Boston out to Worcester. So there's a lot more freight activity that's happening in the Worcester area. And then to your point, there continues to be freight activity between Worcester and Springfield, which is good, keeping trucks off the road. They're on the rails, not on the roads, and beating up our pavement quality. But then there's some opportunities certainly in the future for passenger service too. One thing that our plan that we talked about earlier funds is infrastructure upgrades between Worcester and Springfield, so that in the future we could look at commuter rail service. And we received a federal grant for what's called the inland route. The inland route is basically the route between Boston and Springfield.
Okay.
And we're studying what that could mean in terms of commuter and higher speed service too. So there's potential in the future for us to invest in that corridor for better freight and potentially for some passenger service.
So where would that line actually be, between Worcester and Springfield, or?
Yeah, between Worcester and Springfield.
Okay.
It exists today. We
Okay.
run, as we said, freight service, and Amtrak runs 1 train a day on that,
Okay.
the so-called the Shoreliner that goes from Boston to Chicago. It's not a very fast train, and it's only once a day. So potentially, if we could connect, I think the vision for Massachusetts should really be connecting our state's 3 largest cities, so Springfield, Worcester, and Boston. And the inland route, commuter service, high-speed service has the potential to do that.
Sure. And that's, in Massachusetts, where it's placed in New England, is also, I think, in many ways the hub for commuter rail service to other parts of New England. You've got the Downeaster service through New Hampshire and Maine. Is that something that's part of the plan, as well as improving the sort of cross-state, interstate commuter rail traffic or freight traffic?
It certainly is. So for example, we're working right now with the states of Connecticut and Vermont on a project called the Knowledge Corridor, which is essentially the north-south link between Springfield and the Vermont border, St. Albans and beyond, and south to New Haven. Connecticut's spending a significant amount of dollars upgrading their rail service. So our hope is we could restore service along that line. It doesn't run right now because the rail is in such disrepair. About 18 months ago, we concluded a deal with Pan Am, which is another small freight railroad here in Massachusetts. And one of the items in the deal we were able to achieve was to allow us to run service to Manchester, New Hampshire, and Concord in the future. So if the state of New Hampshire came to Massachusetts and asked us to run service, we now have permission to do that.
That's great.
Much like we run to Providence and T.F. Green Airport today. We run the commuter service for Rhode Island to Rhode Island. So there's a lot of interconnectivity that we can continue to tap for sure.
And I know that some of the analysis of the governor's plan has been how this connects to economic development.
Yes.
I mean, what is sort of your summary or focus on how do all these investments, whether it's commuter rail or roads and bridges, connect to economic development for the state?
No, it's a great question. Some people think we're just investing in transportation for transportation's sake. It's not true. Transportation is actually all about jobs and economic development. If we're doing our job in government in transportation, then it's prompting the private sector to create jobs. So, another example, the clock tower and office complex in Maynard. I mean, they met with those folks a couple of weeks ago. They would love to have better connectivity to commuter rail. We have a lot of young engineers and others who want to live maybe in Cambridge or Somerville, closer to Boston, but reverse commute.
Reverse commute, yep.
And
absolutely.
so thinking about how we can work with our private sector partners, and that kind of better transportation can allow for that job creation. If folks need to know, they should go to downtown Worcester right now, which seems like it's entirely under construction. And I think in part because of the investment government made. You go to Lowell or even Haverhill today, which has sort of a booming downtown, condos and lofts because people can jump on commuter rail. And if you haven't been to the Seaport District in Boston lately, or Assembly Square in Somerville. Assembly Square in Somerville is the largest real estate development project in the East Coast of the United States right now. They wouldn't start until we started construction of a new Orange Line station on the MBTA. And that is catalyzing significant growth. The Seaport District between the Silver Line and the Convention Center. So again, if government is making the right investments, particularly in transportation and infrastructure, business then follows. Business brings jobs, brings economic activity and economic development. And I think that's been a successful strategy when it comes to transportation.
And I agree, and I've seen the connection of the commuter rail with folks moving to Southborough and Westborough to take the commuter rail into Boston or Acton, Littleton, or Shirley. So it really is the case, and how it then sort of has a real positive after effect too on other investments in the downtown.
Absolutely.
And even affecting where people decide to move, both transportation but also the quality of the schools and how that's often interconnected.
Absolutely.
I think the other part, especially for this region, which you mentioned a little bit before, is the regional transit authorities and the proposals, whether the governor's, the House or Senate proposals on transportation finance talk about forward funding for regional transit authorities. Could you talk a little bit about what that actually means and what impact that could have?
Yeah, so the regional transit authority, so there are 16 transit authorities in Massachusetts. We usually just talk about one, the T, but there are 15 others. And as we talked about, a number in your district. Our proposal does two things, or actually three things. One is to forward fund the RTAs, and briefly that means that we pay them in arrears. We pay them now for last year's bills, which means they have to go borrow money to pay their bills until we pay them back. It's crazy. We're going to eliminate that under all the bills, under all the proposals. And then from there, each of the proposals at varying levels provide additional resources to the regional transit authorities to add service. And this is one where we're going to ask the RTAs to go out, have some public workshops, talk to their customers, find out what customers want. Do they want better weekend service? Some RTAs have no weekend service. Later night service, more frequency during peak times and rush hour. So we're not going to dictate what the RTAs do. We're going to give them additional resources, but ask them to go listen to their customers, figure out what's best for that particular RTA, and make it happen. And then finally, all the proposals, the governor and the legislature's proposals, add some additional capital investment in the regional transit authorities. What does that mean? Basically means newer buses, newer vehicles. We're replacing those over time, and then some facilities, back office kind of maintenance facilities and other things to keep the buses running. So we've really thought broadly. It's not just about the MBTA, but it's about all of the transit authorities across the state.
And I know that one of the big thrusts of transportation reform a few years ago was sort of to centralize this, to have better statewide planning, and now you're able to do that. How do you see the interaction and planning between the regional transit authorities and commuter rail, or just transportation in general? I mean, have there been sort of improved planning on that front?
Yeah, I know. Well, you raise a good point, which is, several years ago, thanks to your work, the governors and your colleagues in the House, transportation reform allowed us to merge a number of agencies, save money, realign benefits, eliminate the practice of at the MBTA of 23 and out. You could retire with 23-year service regardless of age. All that's gone. But still, there are improvements that we can do, particularly with the RTAs, as you mentioned. So for example, some number of the RTAs were moving to improved fare collection systems, and rather than going out and purchasing their own, so we had 11 or 12 or 15 different systems, many are migrating to the T system. So if you have a Charlie card, you can now tap and get off on a Metro West bus at Woodland Station and get on a Green Line train and tap. So those kinds of amenities are really important. Service planning as well, aligning schedules so that the Regional Transit Authority bus schedules are more aligned with commuter rail schedules. We're working together in that regard. And we've been talking about holding a last mile summit. This goes back to my point on the need to ensure that for reverse commutes in particular, people can get to their employer's place of business. And so it seems in many instances for commuter rail, you can get to Littleton Station or South Acton, but then your employer is still a mile away,
right,
or 3/4 of a mile away, and you really can't walk there. So whether it's a shuttle service or some kind of a regional RTA service, we want to work with employers as well so we can give people more choices in how they commute.
And that's very encouraging, because that's exactly what is the dynamic that's happening right now, say in Littleton, where you have IBM in Littleton, you have Red Hat in Westford, wanted to know, okay, maybe our employees will take the train out here once the train service improves, but how do we get to that, as you said, the last mile connecting to IBM or another company in the region?
Yeah, and we've heard that from many, particularly those young technology companies that are wanting to attract 20 and 30-somethings that don't own cars or don't want to own cars, right? So we have to be sure that we are adapting with our customers, and if we're not giving them those commuting choices, then it's going to be more difficult, I think, for those companies to attract and retain good talent here in the Commonwealth. So it's incumbent upon us to work with our private sector partners.
Absolutely, and that obviously feeds into economic development. And I know that a big part of sort of the coalition to advocate for these increases in investments in transportation has been the business community. And I'm just wondering, in your time as secretary, I mean, have you seen the business community be willing to step up to talk about, themselves funding a shuttle service or, investing their own dollars, if you will, in transportation?
Absolutely. And part of the reason I think why we're here today talking about transportation and seeing a bill from the House and a bill from the Senate and a bill from the governor all raise revenues to help transportation is because the business community has taken a leadership role. They see the value in paying a little more if government, my colleagues, can get the job done. And I think we've demonstrated that we can get the job done in a lot of projects and things. But no, the business community understands that. We hear it frequently from businesses that want to locate or relocate or build out in the Commonwealth. That transportation for so long has been one of the attractors, if you will. So whether it's a Logan Airport being, within a 5-minute drive of downtown Boston, the closest airport to a downtown metropolitan area in North America, by the way.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or Kendall Square's significant growth because of what's going on. Or even out to 128, out to 495, whether it's the great road connections or now all this investment we're making in commuter rail. It's not happening by randomly. We're doing it because the business community really is encouraging government to invest. And in this conversation we've been having about transportation finance, the business community has been saying, yes, we will pay a little more, but it needs to be invested in these good projects.
And they've definitely stepped up on that front, and I think that's a key reason, as you said, is why we're here today.
That's right.
I know that a lot of the discussion on the transportation finance bill, there was sort of a look back to transportation reform from the last session and sort of what has happened to create those cost savings, those efficiencies.
Sure.
If you could talk a little bit about those, because I will say that I think there's some folks out there still say there needs to be more that needs to be done, and yet I feel like a lot has been done. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you and those folks who say more need to be done are both right. I mean, we've done a lot. We've saved over $500 million in the last 3+ years through a whole host of cost savings. For example, the registry headcount is 250 heads lower today than it was 5-6 years ago because we're putting more of our transactions online. So don't go in line, go online, as the registrar likes to say. So we're using technology to bring our headcounts down. We're also finding creative ways to raise non-fare or fee revenues. the registry's website is the most visited state website we have. Why we weren't selling advertising on that, I don't know, but we now are.
Right,
and so
right.
we're trying to find creative ways to also not only reduce our costs, but also to raise some additional revenues. And so we've brought that to bear. But that alone isn't enough to do all that we have to do to maintain our system. Transportation is such a capital-intensive business, so reform alone is not enough. But there's always more we can do, and folks should know that we are doing. For example, a big project we're working on right now is to bring all electronic tolling to Massachusetts. So on the Tobin Bridge, by the end of the year, we will have no more toll collectors. It will all be electronic. And if our vision comes true, there will be no toll collectors in the state sometime in 2015. It will all be electronic toll. And so folks will have a transponder, will pay at speed, not at 15 miles an hour for the fast lane. But
like the New Hampshire
yeah,
one,
exactly, but like exactly New Hampshire. Or take a picture of your license plate and send you a bill. And that will save tens of millions of dollars when we implement that. So we're trying to bring all these kinds of cost containment models to bear. And as we've said, if people have ideas, happy to hear them too.
That's so important because the mantra was reform before revenue. It's time for revenue, and I know we're getting to that right now with the Transportation Finance Committee. What do you find yourself spending most of your time on right now as we're sort of in this transition period between the system that you've run to the system that you want to get to?
Well, I think it's education, to the public. It's giving people confidence. I'm actually convinced that the public is willing to pay a little more if they have confidence that we can deliver on the services that we talk about. And so showing folks that we've gone from bridge projects that used to take years to now weekends. Right? We just did a project that should have been 18 months over 3 weekends in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. Or the Fast 14 project we did 2 summers ago, which won all sorts of national awards. Or the heavy lift in Wellesley or Phillipston. These are projects we're doing in days and weekends that used to take years, literally.
That's great.
So we're trying to bring that kind of creativity to bear. And I think the public sees that if they see a sense of urgency and know that we're getting the job done, that they're willing to pay a little more. And then 2 more points, listening to people. I've spent a lot of time out on the road on behalf of the governor, listening to folks. No one has told me, Senator, this probably won't surprise you, we have too much transportation, it's too good, we can cut back on it, there aren't any potholes. So really listening to folks about what they want in transportation, what their vision is for the future, and then together making sure that we deliver on that. And
That's
so
great.
that's what we're focused on.
Well, that's why I want to have you on the show. I really appreciate you coming on and have the chance to talk about all you have done. I do want to thank you for all you've done for this district. It's been tremendous, and I look forward to getting through this next phase of the Transportation Finance Bill.
I appreciate it. You've been a great partner, so thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, thanks for being on the show. I want to thank people for joining me for Half Hour on the Hill, and tune in for our next interview. Thank you.